Once again, it's time to take a trip back to 1965. And with this video on singles from December, our series on cool British singles from 1965 comes to an end. After exploring each month of that incredible year, December marks the final installment, and we've got some great singles to close out the series. So without further ado, let's begin. December 1965 saw the release of this double A-side single by the Beatles, featuring Day Tripper and We Can Work It Out.
We can work it out. We can work it out.
The release of the single in December 1965 coincided with the release of Rubber Soul. Even though this 45 has often been cited as the first double A-side single, it wasn't really the first. The Yardbirds had already released a double A-side single a few months earlier, and artists like Cliff Richard and Lonnie Donegan had issued similar pairings in the early 60s. Even so, the Beatles' huge commercial success helped firmly establish the double A-side as an effective chart strategy. Musically, Day Tripper is built around one of the most recognizable guitar riffs of the 60s. In an interview from 1971, George Harrison remarked that the song was the Beatles' attempt at writing a song in the style of The Last Time by the Rolling Stones, which had topped the UK charts in early 1965. This connection highlights the friendly musical rivalry between the two bands, each influencing and challenging the other during this period. We Can Work It Out, by contrast, reflects McCartney's melodic optimism blended with Lennon's more philosophical edge, resulting in one of their most effective stylistic partnerships. The single got positive reviews in the press. The New Musical Express wrote,
"The first side of the Beatles' latest opens with a repetitive guitar phrase, which incidentally persists throughout the track. Then in comes tambourine to establish the steadily rocking shake beat. John dual tracks the vocal, with Paul and George joining in occasionally. And between each chorus, there's an impressive drum roll and tambourine rattle. Not one of the boys' strongest melodically, but it generates plenty of excitement, complete with their falsetto trademarks. The other side is much more startling in conception. This time it's Paul's turn to double track, with tambourine again in evidence, plus an additional depth of sound provided by John on harmonium. It's a sort of mid-tempo shuffle rhythm, except where the pace suddenly slackens in a fascinating way. I'll stick my neck out and tip it for a hit."
The single was a major international success, reaching number 1 in Britain and topping the charts in several countries worldwide.
I sleep through the day. I wake around 4. But I always feel down. I never get off the floor.
December 1965 also saw the release of one of the Pretty Things' finest singles. This was their first single without drummer Viv Prince, who was replaced by Skip Allen. Midnight to 6 was written by guitarist Dick Taylor and vocalist Phil May, and it showcased the band moving further into original material and still remaining faithful to their raw and gritty sound. The song's lyrics evoke the nocturnal lifestyle of swinging London, and for the recording, producer Glyn Johns augmented the Pretty Things with session musicians Nicky Hopkins on piano and Margot Lewis of Goldie and the Gingerbreads on organ. The B-side was another excellent bluesy track called Can't Stand the Pain. The New Musical Express wrote,
"In a week when the flow of releases has dropped to a mere trickle owing to the Christmas holidays, this stands out as the only potential hit. It's written by 2 of the group, Dick Taylor and Phil May, and it's a driving, storming, mid-tempo rhythm and blues, with strident guitar work and walloping drums. The boys harmonize effectively, and both title and lyric are intriguing. The main fault lies in the fact that it's somewhat lacking in melody. It's not really a number you can hum in the street, but the general overall atmosphere is exciting and tingling, and I reckon it should do very well. The flip has a similar tempo, but a more subdued approach, in keeping with the minor key and plaintive lyric. I like the fascinating breaks in tempo."
Despite the quality of the single and the positive reviews, the single only managed to reach number 46 in the British charts. Midnight to 6 achieved its highest chart position in the Netherlands, where the band was more successful than in their native Britain, managing to climb to number 19 on the Dutch charts.
coming over, baby, now. I'm gonna make you move about. Yeah.
This track, titled Let Me Show You How, by a group called Glen Athens and the Trojans, is one of the wildest and most aggressive songs of 1965. Not much is known about the group, but the song was featured on the band's only release, an EP issued by an independent label called Spot. Due to the fact that the EP was released by an independent label, the disc went completely unnoticed and received no press coverage. But this track in particular, with its raw, fuzz-drenched sound and primal energy, was rediscovered years later when it was featured on compilations of obscure British tracks from the 60s, and it's often been cited as an early example of what is now known as freakbeat.
Come on! Help me! Help me! Help me! Help me!
Even though it went unnoticed upon release, the track sounds way ahead of its time, and it stands as an example of the raw energy and experimentation present in mid-60s British music, both within and just outside the mainstream.
Have your number on my wall, and maybe you will get a call from me if I needed someone.
The release of Rubber Soul by the Beatles prompted many bands and artists to cover songs from the album and release them as singles. And the Hollies' cover of If I Needed Someone is one of several Rubber Soul covers that were released the same week the album came out.
Wait till I come back to your side. We forget the tears we cried. Michelle, my belle, these are words that go together well, my Michelle.
This phenomenon occurred because Beatles publisher Dick James used to send advance copies of Beatles albums to various record labels, hoping that the songs would be covered, ensuring that a lot of money would go into his pockets. And of course, Lennon and McCartney would also earn substantial royalties. Lennon and McCartney didn't seem to mind other artists covering their songs, but George Harrison felt differently. If I Needed Someone was heavily influenced by the Byrds and marked Harrison coming into his own as a songwriter. But he was not happy about the Hollies version and clearly expressed his dislike for it in a New Musical Express interview from December 1965. Journalist Alan Smith reported,
George began to get ready for the first performance. What about songwriting, I asked. I see you've written one for the Hollies. Any plans to step up your songwriting plans in the future? George turned sharply away from the mirror. Tell people I didn't write it for the Hollies, he said bluntly. It's called If I Needed Someone, and they've done it as their new single. But their version is not my kind of music. I think it's rubbish the way they've done it. They've spoilt it. The Hollies are all right musically, but the way they do their records, they sound like session men who've just got together in a studio without ever seeing each other before. It's technically good, but that's all.
Lennon also criticized their treatment of the song, having long disliked the Hollies' sound. These comments incensed Graham Nash, who responded by saying that he was tired of Lennon's continual insults and said that he would back any of us boys against the Beatles musically any time. A short-lived feud between the Hollies and the Beatles ensued, although by early 1966, George Harrison told the press that the issues between both bands had already been resolved. The B-side was a strong track written by the Hollies themselves, who at this point still credited their group compositions under the pseudonym L. Ransford.
I got away in my own.
If I Needed Someone was the first George Harrison composition to become a success in the charts, as a result of the Hollies cover. The song peaked at number 20 in Britain, but by the Hollies standards at the time, it was one of their least successful singles.
Wouldn't you agree, baby, you and me got a groovy kind of love.
One of the biggest British hits released in December 1965 was A Groovy Kind of Love by the Mindbenders. This was their first single without lead singer Wayne Fontana, who had left the band a few months earlier to start a solo career. Following Wayne Fontana's exit, many fans and critics assumed that the Mindbenders were finished, but the single proved them all wrong. A Groovy Kind of Love became a massive hit, and it was far more successful than Wayne Fontana's first solo effort. The New Musical Express wrote,
A commendable first disc from these boys, following their break with Wayne Fontana. An attractively harmonized rock ballad, with chanting and humming support and a warm depth of sound in the backing. The melody is decidedly easy on the ear, but it's one of those discs which need a few spins before registering, so its future depends on the amount of airtime it gets.
The B-side was an Eric Stewart composition very much in the same R&B style as many British groups from that period.
People say that love is a blind cause they've been hurt. They've been hurt. People say that love is unkind cause they've been hurt.
The single initially failed to take off due to the Christmas rush, but it eventually began to chart, entering the record retailer chart on the 19th of January 1966 at number 34 and peaking at number 2 on the 16th of March. And the single also managed to become a big hit in the States, where it also peaked at number 2.
I'm a rootin' tootin' highfalutin' son of a gun. I'm a rootin' tootin' highfalutin' son of a gun.
Prior to forming Cream with Eric Clapton, Jack Bruce and Ginger Baker were members of the Graham Bond organization. During this period, Jack Bruce also found time to release this 45, which was his first solo single. Both sides were produced by Robert Stigwood and penned by Jack Bruce himself. The A-side was a jazzy number with a Dixieland feel.
I've had my fill of drinking and gambling. I've had my times of laughing all day.
But to my ears, the highlight of the single is the B-side.
I'm a rootin' tootin' highfalutin' son of a gun. I'm a rootin' tootin' highfalutin' son of a gun. Why don't you
As a curious note, if you listen to the song, you can actually hear the riff that Jack Bruce later used in Sunshine of Your Love, which Cream released in 1968, and which became one of their signature songs. The single went pretty much unnoticed and didn't chart, but both sides of the single enjoyed a new lease of life in 1975 when they were included on this Polydor compilation called Rare Tracks.
Girl, I stand accused. People say I love you.
By December 1965, most of the early Merseybeat bands that had reached success during the early days of Beatlemania were already seen as outdated and stuck in the past. The Beatles were always very aware of what was happening in the music scene, and they managed to evolve and adapt to the new trends while still maintaining their signature sound. But most of those early Merseybeat groups struggled to do the same. But of course, there were always exceptions, and this single by the Merseybeats with its fuzz guitar and stomping beat showcased the band updating their approach both musically and visually, with the band replacing their old uniform look and adopting a more modern image. Both sides were produced by The Who's manager Kit Lambert, and probably because of Lambert's involvement, the single featured Keith Moon guesting on the A-side, but he didn't play drums on the track. Moon was in charge of the gong crashes that can be heard towards the end of the song.
You disturb my balance of mind. I couldn't help what I did at the time.
The New Musical Express wrote,
There's something about this track which I find fascinating. It certainly isn't the melody. There's not really a tune you can whistle. Maybe it's the intriguing lyric which holds the attention, or perhaps it's that insistent beat which persists throughout, together with an underlying tinkling effect. More likely it's a blend of all these factors. In any event, it's a disc that's well worth hearing, and one which must stand a chance.
Despite the good reviews and the Merseybeats' attempt to keep up with the changing times, the single only managed to reach number 38, and this became the Merseybeats' last single. After the breakup, Tony Crane and Billy Kinsley continued as a vocal duo called the Merseys, scoring a major hit in 1966 with the song Sorrow. Just like the previous song by the Emeralds, this single by Robb Storme and the Whispers went largely unnoticed. But the A-side has some historical significance because according to Pete Townshend himself, this track inspired him to write Substitute by The Who, and the similarities are quite obvious. In a Rolling Stone interview from 1971, Townsend said, "The stock downbeat riff used in the verses on Substitute, I pinched it from a record that was played to me in Blind Date, a feature in Melody Maker. It was by a group who later wrote to thank me for saying nice things about their record in the feature." Robb Storme and the Whispers never achieved major success, but they are remembered as one of the first British groups to cover a song from Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys. Later in 1967, the group changed its name to the Orange Bicycle, who went on to release some excellent psychedelic singles and a strong full-length album in 1970.
Darkness all around me now, haunting memories of how you and I have loved, but now it's over.
Just like the previously mentioned Jack Bruce, another musician who wouldn't achieve major success until later in the 60s was Justin Hayward, who went on to find fame when he joined the Moody Blues. This was Justin Hayward's first solo single, released by Pi Records. At the time, Hayward had been signed by Lonnie Donegan to his publishing company Tyler, a clever move for Donegan in retrospect, though few could have predicted that Justin was destined for such great success. The A-side was a rather lackluster song called London Is Behind Me.
London is behind me and I'm stuck out on the motorway. Two lifts this morning, they were both going my way.
The highlight was the B-side, an unusual track with a moody folk-pop feel and a compelling hypnotic rhythm.
They must come, please make it soon, I'll lie awake.
The single went completely unnoticed and failed to chart. Justin Hayward would still have to wait a couple of years before success knocked on his door.
I close my eyes and you will feel your memories still.
I hope you enjoyed this trip back to December 1965, and I hope you've enjoyed these series on cool British singles released that year. See you next time.